remember the exact moment her spit landed on my cheek. It wasn't just wet. It burned, not because of the sting of saliva but because of what it meant. The woman who'd once held me in her arms as a baby now looked at me like I was something dirty. Something shameful. It was summer. Hot and sticky in the way only a small Brazilian town could be. I was 13, skinny, wearing second-hand jeans that were too short at the ankles and a t-shirt that had faded from too many washes and too little detergent. My flip-flops were cracked. My pride had already been crushed long before that day. My name is Lucas. I was raised by my mother, Carolina, a cleaner who worked herself to exhaustion every day. My father had vanished when I was 5, disappeared into the city, promising work and never returning. My mother and I lived in a tiny one-room house behind the bakery where she worked. We had enough to eat, just barely, but nothing more. No toys. No treats. Just the same rice and beans, day in and day out, but I never blamed her. Never once. My mother was love in human form. My grandmother, on the other hand, Dona Eloisa, was a force of judgment wrapped in lace curtains and gold jewelry. She lived on the other side of town, in a house so clean it smelled like bleach and emptiness. She had married well, twice, and her current husband was some retired colonel with a pension fat enough to choke on. I had only met her twice before that day. The first time, she'd looked at me and said, "So this is the bastard?" I didn't know what bastard meant then. My mother's silence afterward told me enough. The second time, she ignored me completely. I sat in a chair for 3 hours while she spoke to my mother as if I didn't exist, but that summer, everything changed. My mother got sick. Real sick. The kind of sick that makes neighbors whisper and the pharmacist shake his head when you come asking for medicine you can't afford. I watched her get weaker each day, her cough ripping through our nights like thunder. She tried to keep working, but after she collapsed outside the bakery one morning, she couldn't get out of bed anymore. I did what I had to do. I worked. I begged. I stole food from the market when I couldn't earn enough sweeping floors or carrying bags. I tried to take care of her. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough, and so, with trembling hands and a burning face, I did the one thing I swore I never would. I went to see my grandmother. She opened the door, eyes squinting like I was the sun itself, too bright and offensive to look at. "What do you want?" she asked. Her voice was sharp, brittle, the kind that could cut you even when she whispered. I told her about my mother. How she was dying. How we had no money. No food. I begged her for help. Not for me, never for me. For my mother. Her daughter, and then she did it. She spat on me. The spit hit my cheek, slid down to my collarbone, and stayed there like a brand. Her eyes didn't blink. She looked at me with such disgust, such cold hatred, I thought I might disappear under it. "You're nothing," she said. "Just like your mother. You think you can crawl back here, filthy and hungry, and get something from me? You're not family. You're garbage." I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of the moment. My legs didn't want to move. My mouth hung open. I wiped the spit with the back of my hand and looked at it like it might give me an answer, and then I left. I walked the 3 kilometers back home in the heat, every step heavier than the last. When I got back, my mother asked me what happened. I told her I asked for help, and it didn't work. She didn't ask anything else. She just pulled me close and whispered, "I'm sorry." 2 days later, she died. I buried my mother in a donated plot, with a priest who didn't know her name and 3 neighbors who came out of pity. I was 13 and alone in the world. The pain didn't come all at once. It came in slow, brutal waves. And every time I thought I had nothing left to lose, another wave would rise, but I made myself a promise: someday, I would come back, someday, she would see me again, not poor, not broken. And she would remember what she did, she would fall to her knees, and she would beg me to forgive her. After the funeral, there was nothing. No food. No electricity. No one to turn to. The neighbors stopped knocking after a week. The bakery job my mother had clung to was never mine to inherit. I was just a kid, and not the kind people helped. I had the kind of poverty that made people uncomfortable. The kind that made them avoid eye contact. I slept on the same bed where my mother died. Her scent still clung to the pillow. Every night, I curled into myself, praying for dreams that never came. My stomach would groan, and I'd chew on the inside of my cheek to distract myself from the pain. Sometimes I'd whisper to the dark, "It's just one more day. Just make it one more day, Lucas." I didn't know then that it would take years. When I hit 14, I left the town entirely. I walked for 2 days to reach the city. Sao Paulo. I had no plan, just rage and hunger. I thought if I could just find a job, any job, I could start over. Be someone new. I slept in bus stations, stole bread from open market stalls, and cleaned windshields at stoplights with a dirty rag I found on the side of the road. Drivers either ignored me or threw coins like they were doing God a favor. One man handed me a sandwich through the window. I almost cried when I tasted mayonnaise. Then one day, everything changed. I was scrubbing the sidewalk in front of a cafe when a man in a suit stepped out. He wasn't like the others, not arrogant, not cruel. He watched me work, then asked, "Who taught you to scrub like that?" I told him my mother had been a cleaner. I learned by watching her. He offered me a real job. Not in the cafe, but at a cleaning company he managed. He said they needed someone small enough to clean under counters and behind industrial kitchens. The pay wasn't much, but they fed the staff. I said yes before he could change his mind. From that day on, I worked like a machine. Every surface gleamed when I was done. I took extra shifts. I arrived early, stayed late. When others rested, I cleaned more. They called me the ghost, because I moved fast and silent. At night, I took leftover food home in my backpack. I shared it with other street kids. One boy named Tiago latched onto me. He was younger, maybe 10, but had the eyes of a man who'd already lost too much. I let him follow me. He reminded me of myself. I saved every cent I could. I bought books from street vendors, torn, stained, but filled with knowledge. I taught myself to read better, then write. I studied when I wasn't working, sometimes using the cafe's lights outside to see after dark. I found a library. I read everything I could get my hands on: business, law, computers. I didn't understand half of it, but I kept going. One of the librarians, a woman named Beatrice, noticed me. She began leaving books out for me: grammar guides, math workbooks, even English textbooks. "Why do you work so hard?" she asked me once. I told her, "Because someone spit on me for being poor. I'll never let anyone do it again." By the time I was 17, I was managing the cleaning staff. By 18, I'd taken night classes and passed the test to finish high school. At 19, I started my own cleaning company. It was small, just me and Tiago at first. But we were relentless. We cleaned offices, restaurants, apartments. I trained everyone myself. We wore uniforms. I made sure we always looked professional, always dignified. In 5 years, we grew. I hired more staff, bought better equipment, partnered with local businesses. I treated my team like gold, because I knew what it meant to be invisible. When I turned 23, I registered the company under the name Carolina Solutions, after my mother. Every invoice carried her name. Every success whispered her memory. I moved into a small apartment. Bought real shoes. Real clothes. Ate meat without guilt, but one thing still burned in my chest: Eloisa. I thought of her every time I signed a contract. Every time a client shook my hand. Every time someone looked at me with respect. I didn't want revenge. I wanted her to see that the boy she spat on had become something more. What she lost, And that chance came on an ordinary Wednesday. A woman called our office asking for a full house deep clean. She sounded older, fragile, but polite. Gave the address and said the job was urgent. When I looked up the address, I froze. It was her, Dona Eloisa. She didn't know, of course. I hadn't seen her in over 10 years. But I knew that street. That number. That house with its white gates and gold trim. It was still there, and suddenly, all the years I'd fought to become someone, they weren't enough. Not until I stood in front of her, not until she looked at me and saw what she threw away, decided I would take that job myself, not send my team. Me, the boy she spat on and now a man, with his mother's name on every wall. The gates were still white, they hadn't changed. Neither had the house. Same pale yellow walls, same pristine garden with trimmed hedges like soldiers guarding her pride. But I had changed. I arrived in uniform, tailored navy blue overalls with Carolina Solutions embroidered across the chest. I wore gloves, polished boots, and confidence. My cleaning kit was packed with precision, everything labeled and spotless. No one looking at me that day would have guessed I had once begged for rice on a street corner. I rang the bell, it buzzed, and after a few seconds, I heard the shuffling of slippers on tiles. Then, the door creaked open, and there she was, older. Smaller than I remembered. Time had folded her in on herself. Her once perfectly ironed hair was thin, gray, pulled back into a bun that trembled at the edges. Her skin sagged where it used to stretch tight. But her eyes, sharp, cruel, calculating, were exactly the same. She didn't recognize me. Bom dia, she said, peering at the logo on my chest. You're from the cleaning service? I nodded once. Yes, ma'am. I'm Lucas. She opened the door fully and stepped aside. Come in. The house is a mess. I had to let go of my maid. That girl was stealing, I'm sure of it. I don't trust anyone these days. I walked in, breathing in the sterile scent of bleach and loneliness. The air was cold, not from the temperature, but from the absence of warmth. This house had never been a home. She led me through the living room, muttering about dust, fingerprints, the curtains needing steam. I followed, pretending to take notes on my clipboard. But my heart pounded in my chest. I was standing inside the place I once ran from in shame. And she didn't even know, until we reached the hallway. There, on a side table, sat a photograph. It was old, a black and white image of my mother as a teenager. She was wearing a school uniform, hair in braids, smiling softly. My chest tightened. I turned to her. She was beautiful. She paused. Looked at the photo. Her mouth twisted. She was a disappointment, she said. Ran off with some useless man and wasted her life. I told her it would end badly. She didn't run, I replied calmly. He left her. She raised a son on her own. She shrugged. Still her fault. Always crying to me for help. Pathetic. I dropped the clipboard. It hit the floor with a loud clack. She flinched. When she turned back to look at me, really look, something shifted in her face. Confusion. Then suspicion. Then realization. Her lips parted slightly. Wait. Lucas? I nodded. She took a step back. No. That's not possible. I said nothing. She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. Her hands trembled. You came here to humiliate me, she asked, voice cracking. Is that it? You want revenge? I took a slow breath. No, I said. I came because this is what I do now. I run a company. I clean homes. I solve problems. But mostly, I wanted you to see who I became. She stared at me, stunned. Her eyes filled with something I never thought I'd see, fear. I walked past her, calmly, toward the photograph of my mother. I picked it up and brushed off a speck of dust. She died because we had no money for medicine, I said quietly. I begged you for help. You spat in my face. She opened her mouth, but no words came. I placed the photo down gently, and now, I continued, you need me. Isn't that something? She tried to speak. Lucas. I didn't know she was that sick, you knew. I was angry. I didn't mean, you meant every word. And then it happened, she crumpled, right there in the hallway, her knees hitting the floor with a soft, pitiful thud. Her hands trembled in front of her. Her face crumpled, not with dignity, but with desperation. Please, she whispered. Forgive me. I was cruel. I know. I didn't understand. I was trying to protect myself. My reputation. I didn't know you'd survive. I thought you'd disappear. But you didn't. Look at you. You made something of yourself. I watched her shake, the same woman who had called me garbage, who had turned her back on my dying mother, now on her knees, begging. I didn't speak, I didn't move, I just looked at her. Long and hard. The moment I had dreamed of for 10 years was right in front of me. And it didn't feel like triumph, it felt like silence. Finally, I crouched down beside her. Not to lift her. Not to console her. Just to meet her eyes. I forgive you, I said. She blinked, shocked. You do? I nodded slowly. Yes. But not for you. And then I stood. I forgive you for my mother. Because if I carry hate any longer, it'll stain everything I've built. She wouldn't want that. Her shoulders sagged. She looked like someone who had prepared for a fight and found only mercy, but I wasn't done. I stepped closer. You can keep your mansion. Your curtains. Your gold. I don't need them. I pulled a business card from my pocket and placed it on the table. That's my company. You can call if you need anything cleaned again. We charge extra for homes with ghosts. Then I walked out. The sun hit my face as I stepped through the gates. The same gates that once made me feel small, but not anymore. I was no longer the boy who begged, I was the man she begged. Asterisk. I didn't look back, not once. As the white gate clicked shut behind me, I felt something leave my chest, something heavy that had lived there for over a decade. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like release. I walked slowly to the car. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Bought with years of sweat and silence. I sat behind the wheel, hands on the steering wheel, and let myself breathe. She had knelt. She had asked for forgiveness. And I had given it, but forgiveness is strange. You expect it to taste like honey. Instead, it tastes like metal, sharp and cold. I didn't feel better. Not yet. Just hollow, like I'd emptied out a wound I had lived with for so long I forgot it wasn't supposed to be there. Over the next few days, I told no one. Not Tiago. Not my staff. Not even Beatriz, who had become something like family over the years. I held the moment close, like a fragile piece of glass I didn't know what to do with, but word travels in strange ways. One morning, Tiago walked into my office holding a newspaper. Did you see this? He asked. I hadn't. The headline read: Socialite Dona Eloisa hospitalized after fall, family ties resurface. The article was short. A few lines about her losing balance at home, hitting her head, being admitted to a private hospital. But what caught my eye was the final sentence. Sources say she was recently reunited with her estranged grandson, the successful entrepreneur Lucas Vieira, founder of Carolina Solutions. My stomach turned. I hadn't spoken to any reporters. I hadn't said a word. I knew immediately who had leaked it. She had. Or someone close to her. Maybe the nurse. Maybe the housekeeper. But someone wanted that story out, wanted the world to know she had a grandson worth something, wanted people to believe there had always been love between us. I felt anger rise again, hot and bitter. Was this her final play? To rewrite the narrative? To pretend she hadn't spat on me, that she had supported me all along. Tiago sat across from me, frowning. You okay? I looked at him. The kid who had once followed me through alleyways barefoot, now a grown man with steady hands and a sharp mind. My right hand in the business. My brother in every way that mattered. She's in the hospital, I said. Wants the world to believe she loves me. Are you gonna go? I didn't answer. Not then, but later that night, I found myself standing outside the hospital. I didn't plan to visit. I just drove there, parked, and stared up at the windows. A strange guilt gnawed at the edges of me. It wasn't about her. It was about the little boy I used to be, the one who had stood at her door, begging for help. What would he want? Would he want me to turn away, or to face her one last time? I went in. The nurse looked surprised but nodded when I said my name. She's awake, she said. Weak, but alert. I entered the room. It smelled like antiseptic and wilted flowers. She lay in the bed, smaller than ever, the machines beside her humming softly. Her eyes opened when she heard the door. They were pale now, clouded by time. But she saw me, and she smiled. Lucas, she whispered, voice dry and papery. You came. I stood at the foot of her bed, arms crossed. I saw the article, I said. She winced. I didn't write it. The nurse called someone. I didn't ask her to. Convenient, I replied. She looked down at her hands. Maybe part of me wanted people to know. To know you turned out well. That I was connected to someone good. But you weren't, I said coldly. Not then. I know. Her voice cracked. And I live with that every day. You think I don't? I see your face every time I close my eyes. The way you looked when I did what I did. Silence stretched between us. I thought wealth was everything, she said at last. Reputation. Appearances. I was raised to believe that shame was a disease. That poverty meant failure. Your mother, she frightened me. She reminded me of everything I tried to bury. And you were the proof that I failed her. I didn't speak. I was wrong, she whispered. I see that now. But I don't expect you to care. You owe me nothing. She reached under the blanket, pulled out a folded envelope, and held it out with trembling fingers. I didn't take it. What is it? My will, she said. I changed it. Everything I have, the house, the accounts, it's yours. I stared at the paper. Why? She looked up at me, eyes wet. Because I don't want it to rot when I'm gone. And because maybe it can do some good in your hands. I shook my head. You think that makes it right? No, she said. I think it's too late to make it right. I looked at her. Really looked, and saw not a monster, but a broken woman, collapsed under the weight of her own choices. Her cruelty had cost her everything. Now, all she had was a dying name and a hospital bed, and me. I don't want your money, I said. She closed her eyes, ashamed. But I'll take the house, I added. Not for me. I'll turn it into something useful. Her eyes fluttered open. What do you mean? You'll see, I said. If you live long enough. She laughed softly. It was the first real sound she'd made. Fragile, but human, left without saying goodbye. Some part of me had wanted that ending, a dramatic confrontation, a final wound to throw at her. But instead, what I found was something quieter, mercy. I would not become what she had been. I had carried her spit on my cheek for years, invisible but heavy. Now, I was done with it. 2 months later, the house was mine. I didn't keep a single piece of furniture. Everything, the gold-rimmed chairs, the ivory lamps, the porcelain vases that had once been too precious to touch, was sold or donated. The chandelier that hung like a crown in the hallway? Gone. The grand mirror she used to check her hair before belittling the world? Gone. I walked through each room with a hammer in hand, side by side with Tiago, who watched me with a grin that said, I've waited my whole life for this. We tore down the walls, painted over the past, we made space for something new. 6 months later, the house reopened. But not as a mansion, as a shelter, Casa Carolina. A center for women and children escaping homelessness, poverty, and abuse. Open beds. Daily meals. Education programs. Counseling. Showers. Legal aid. A computer room. A tiny library, with all the same books Beatrice had once given me. Every room whispered hope. The name above the door wasn't mine. It was my mother's, the woman who scrubbed floors to buy me school shoes. Who gave her last breath for my fever to break. Who died believing the world had no space for people like us. Now she had her own building, her own legacy. Carolina's house. People came in broken, like I once was. We welcomed them. Gave them food, shelter, respect. We didn't ask where they came from. We asked what they needed to heal, and slowly, word spread. The shelter was featured on local news. Donations arrived. Volunteers offered their time. The community that had once turned away from my mother now gathered under her name. One day, I received a letter, written in trembling script. Lucas, I saw what you did with the house. I was wrong about you. About your mother. Please know I am proud, even if I don't deserve to be. I hope one day we meet again, in a better place. Eloisa. I folded the letter and placed it in the shelter's guest book. Not to honor her, but to show that transformation, even at the edge of death, is possible. She passed away quietly a week later. Alone, I didn't attend the funeral, but I sent flowers, white lilies. 4 endings, and sunflowers. For new beginnings. A year later, on the shelter's first anniversary, I stood on the front steps, surrounded by staff and volunteers, as we unveiled a plaque by the entrance. It read, "In memory of Carolina Vieira. She cleaned houses. She raised a son. She changed the world." Tiago stood beside me, tears in his eyes. "This is what she deserved," he said. I nodded, and for the first time, I felt free. No more hunger. No more hate, only legacy, only love. I thought of that moment long ago, when a boy stood at a mansion gate, face still wet with spit, heart full of shame. He didn't know that one day, he'd own the very place that rejected him. He didn't know he'd turn it into light, but I did. I lived it, and now, when people ask me how I rose from nothing, I tell them, my grandmother spat in my face for being poor, but ended up on her knees begging for forgiveness. I didn't rise to get revenge. I rose to build something better. And that's what I did every single day.